King, a motorcar company, would introduce the V8 of their very own in 1915. But before getting into all of that, King was one of the very first cars in the United States. Charles Brady King would build his first car in Detroit, 1896. And the original goal of this car was to be entered in a race, the Chicago Times-Herald race in 1895. Needless to say, Charles missed that race, but his car was one of the first successful automobiles driving the streets of Detroit, which would be a spectacle to see because you have to remember the streets were filled with horses and carriages and horse shit literally everywhere. People forget that the horse waste was everywhere. It was in the streets, storefronts, houses, even in your shoes. It was everywhere. Anyway, seeing a horseless carriage for the very first time would be incredible because finally, it's a solution to the horse problem. You're probably sitting there thinking, a horse is greener than gasoline-powered car, but that's not really the case. 1,000-pound horse produces 51 pounds of waste per day per horse. And that's not all. You also have to feed the horse, which a horse at that size would consume an average of 20 pounds of food and 8 gallons of water a day. So you'd have to be rich to have one. And maybe that's why not everyone had a carriage behind the horse, because they just couldn't physically afford the carriage. Anyway, a young Henry Ford would get to witness Charles King driving his car through the streets of Detroit. King wanted to make this car for anybody that had the money to buy it, but building a car back then for public sale had a lot of red tape, and Selden owned the patent, so every car that was built, Selden got a kickback for. Henry Ford would take care of that problem in court a few years later. Charles King would dismantle the original car and sold it to Byron Carter. That car would become the original Carter car. Charles King would go and work for various automotive companies, getting inside knowledge of the business before establishing his very own King Motorcar Company in 1910, Detroit, Michigan. They would use gray motors to power their cars in the beginning. But in October of 1914, King would announce adding a V8 to their engine offerings. The King V8 came just 2 months after Cadillac announced their V8 in October of 1914, with advertised price of $1,350, claimed to be the world's first popular priced 8. The best years King ever had, 1915 and 1916, thinking the success was from the 8. They would discontinue the 30 horsepower 4-cylinder after 1916, only offering the 8 as a sole engine offering. Between the years of 1924 and 1925, King would go bankrupt. It's believed that about 100 cars were built in 1925, but sources conflict on when exactly they went under. The King V8 was an in-block motor design, L-head valve design, where the valves and pistons are inside the engine block. They run right beside the pistons, positioned on top, but in the engine block, not on top as in physically on top like an overhead valve design. Blocks are set at 90-degree cylinder bank angle and are bolted to the crankcase. The heads and cylinder blocks are one single piece, meaning they don't come apart. Cylinders are cast in 2 blocks of 4. Intake valves are rather large. This engine uses thermosiphoning for cooling. Lubrication is force-fed with a gear pump. Oil is pumped from the oil pan reservoir directly into the gear pump through a filter screen and then forced through a distribution tube running the length of the engine to each main bearing, which are Babbitt-lined bronze, and there are 3 main bearings. It then flows through the crankshaft, which is hollow, to the connecting rods and throws it on the cylinder walls. Carburetor is the updraft variety, located in between the 2 banks of cylinders. Behind the timing cover is 2 silent chain drivers. The one drives the generator, the other one drives the camshaft. Valves are bevel seat type. This engine does not have removable heads, so to do a valve job, you have to remove the cylinder blocks from the crankcase and go through the bottom. Looking at this cutaway, the cylinder blocks look to be equal and not offset, which alludes to the Blake and Ford connecting rods being used. The King V8 was offered in 3 displacements, starting with the smallest displacement. 237 cubic inch displacement L-head V8, 3.8 liters. It was good for anywhere between 40 to 45 horsepower around 2,500 RPM with an estimated 100 pound-feet or 135 newton meters around 1,000 RPM with a bore of 2.75 inches and a stroke of 5 inches. Years this engine was used, 1915 through 1925, could be found in the Model D. Interesting, the ads exclaim 0 to 60, not 0 to 60, I'm sorry, 0 to 25 miles per hour in 11 seconds, and I wonder if a horse was faster. Moving on to the middle engine, 259.67 cubic inch displacement King L-head V8, 4.2 liters. It was good for around 50 horsepower, 2,500 RPM with an estimated 110 pound-feet or 149 newton meters around 1,000 RPM with a bore of 2 7/8 inches and a stroke of 5 inches. Years this engine was used, somewhere between the years of 1915 through 1924. Which leads us to the biggest and baddest displacement that King ever made. 282 cubic inch displacement, L-head V8, 4.6 liters. It was good to up to 69 horsepower, 2,500 RPM, with an estimated 145 pound-feet or 196 newton meters at 1,000 RPM with a bore of 3 inches and a stroke of 5 inches. 3 main bearings. The engine weighed 460 pounds. Years this engine was used, 1914 through 1924. Also, if you can add to the King story in any way, shape, or form, please leave a comment in the comment section below. After doing more research and already recording the first part of this episode, I found out that Charles King did work for Northway Motors, the same company that built the Cadillac V8, or I should say that cast the Cadillac V8. This engine and the Cadillac engine look very similar. Not the same, but similar. So I wonder if Northway had a role in this engine as well. All right, now it's time for Would You Rather. These aren't in the same price point, and they're not really fair, but which one would you rather have? All V8 powered 1920 Apperson 820 Anniversary 8 or 1921 King 8 or 1916 Scripps Booth with that gorgeous Faro overhead valve V8 in the Model D. I'm going to leave this here for a minute. If you need more time, feel free, pause the video. On to the second scenario, 1921 Will St. Clair with that overhead cam V8 or 1921 King 8 or 1921 Cole Aero 8. Once again, I'm going to leave this here for a minute. If you need more time, feel free, pause the video. Now it's time for Name That Tune. I don't know why I said it like Cartman. Now it's time for Name That Tune. First person to get both the name of the band and the song title correctly in the comment section will have their comment pinned to the top of it. Take that, Dennis. Yeah, right. He'll probably get that within the first 5 minutes. Anyway, thank you all so much for coming out and watching this. If you'd like to get in touch with me, shoot me a comment in the comment section below. Or you can always send me an email at what_it's_like@yahoo.com. Until next time, toodaloo!
Hey, I want to do the toodaloo.
He wasn't in here.